Hello, this is Paul Chek. Welcome back to my mini-series on the mind-body connection. Today is part 4. What is your myth? This is neat stuff, important stuff, and seldom thought about by most people. Even professionals in many branches of psychology don't look at this stuff. I know it's never looked at, to my knowledge, in things like orthopedic rehabilitation, conditioning athletes, and many other areas where it should be, because, as I'll show you, your myth, conscious or unconscious, has a lot to do with the experience you're having of life. Now, in my last section, I forgot to give you some resources. I will remind you, if you want more information that encapsulates the kind of teachings I'm sharing here, if you go to if you look at my ebook, you can go to chekinstitute.com or ppssuccess.com. The ebook, The Last 4 Doctors You'll Ever Need, How to Get Healthy Now. Multimedia ebook, video clips, audio clips, slideshows. I show how to do working in exercises, Tai Chi, how to use instruments to harmonize your body, such as tuning forks. I show you how to breathe properly, and more importantly, you have your 4 doctor explanations, and I show you how to set your core values up, which is very, very critical to this discussion and to everything that we're talking about. PPS Lessons 1, how to find and live your legacy. 2, self-management, where I talk about the science of brainwashing and how to use the science to heal yourself so that you're not with a head full of stinking thinking. For those of you that have been, for example, emailing me on this last one on YouTube asking about meditative experiences and nervousness and shadow type behaviors, you want to get into PPS Lesson 2, because a lot of the negative stuff that's rising up in you is the side effect of what we would call brainwashing or programming, and once you learn how to heal that and know that you can heal that, it'll take a lot of your anxiety away. 3, goal setting. We talked about archetypes last time. Goal setting is essential to help keep you aware of where your own stated middle is. Okay? Lesson 7 is how to learn, and I think that's really important. Lesson 9 is don't get your feathers wet. It's about realizing that opinions are like assholes. Everyone's got one. Some of them don't smell so good. And if you go to Don Miguel Ruiz's 4 agreements, one of them is don't take anything personally. It means everybody's living their own story, their own dream, and they're doing the best they can with what they've got. So to the degree that negative feedback is negative to you, then if it's honest, use it. That's constructive criticism. If it's not, then blow it off and know that their universe can go bump into any other universe it wants to. You don't have to keep doing it. 12, sacred listening, which gets into some of the concepts of shamanism and really going beyond hearing and into listening to hear what is truly being said as opposed to what you're just hearing. Okay? HLC 1, 2, and 3 integrate these concepts very deeply. If you watched every YouTube clip I've ever made, you still wouldn't have near the education or the functional capacity for application that anyone who's been through to at least HLC 2 level. HLC 3 is much more comprehensive, looking at infant development, looking at psychological typing, looking at organ gland reflexes throughout the body and how the organ gland reflexes and structural changes relate to psychological challenges or issues of the psyche. So there's a lot of information in my courses that integrates this into a working, living system, which is why I teach holistic health, and I am a holistic health practitioner by license. That's what I do. I'm also licensed as a shaman with a federal license, and I do that too, but really, I find all the shamanic stuff is useless without all the other stuff. Otherwise, all you do is just get people living in fairyland and, walking around forever beating drums and doing stuff, but I like to see a mix of modern wisdom and ancient wisdom for a better whole. Okay? So today we're going to talk about myth. So far we've gone through unconditional love, what love is, what the polarity of existence is, their holy trinity, how spirit manifests existence as experience in reality. We talked about love as potential and how that relates to your archetypes. Your archetypes have to be supported effectively. To be supported effectively, you need core values. Today we're going to talk about our myth and how that relates to our experience. And you'll see that the myth, the archetypes, the values are all part of an integrated system that you're experiencing as embodiment in the whole. Okay? So let's talk about myth. Now, the master of myth, bar none, is Joseph Campbell. So if you want to learn about myths, you can read 1,000 books by 1,000 authors, and almost every one of those authors, if they have any real knowledge of myth, will have studied Joseph Campbell's work, because as Carl Jung is to, shall we say, depth or transpersonal psychology, Joseph Jung is to mythology. In other words, he's the master. Okay? A myth is a story that serves to integrate yourself, your individual perceivable ego self, Paul Chek self, with the self, the overarching self. When you see self in caps like that, you're talking about the world. First, the self that we all depend on, but the world depends upon the cosmos, and the self is also a mystery because we don't know where it begins and ends. So the myth, then, is a story that serves to integrate the individual self with the overarching self, which can be perceived to have different levels from world to universe or galaxy to cosmos, whatever structure you want to work up to. They're all like Russian dolls nested inside of each other. But once you go past the self into the world, you're in the capital S-E-L-F. Okay? Now, I'm going to share Joseph Campbell's 4 functions of a myth, and then I'm going to finish with explaining how that ultimately relates to all this over here. Joseph Campbell's first function of a myth: to evoke an individual sense of grateful, affirmative awe of the monstrous mystery of existence. So your myth should, if it's a functional myth, it should leave you in a sense of reverent awe. Right? I'm sure when people look at things like Schrodinger's cat, Bell's theorem, the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum physics, and all the things that are coming out in science now, or Stephen Hawking's mathematical proof that the universe itself emerges from zero. These are all things that shall we say, are myth busters, right? So somebody who has ideas that are completely different than what science produces can be in a myth-busting situation. For example, if you believe the Earth is only 6,000 years of age, but science says something radically different, and the 6,000 years of age concept is very, very ancient and antiquated. You know, in other words, back then, people didn't even have a cell phone, and they had to use donkeys to deliver mail, and now we have the internet and laser beams and quantum physics actually transporting particles from one location to another. Beam me up, Scotty. So a myth that worked over there is going to have a very, very hard time working here. So this is where we get into lots of troubles with religious ideology, because we're taking ancient ideas from cultures that we aren't in, that had to live in an environment that we don't know anymore, with outdated, antiquated technologies. Not that some of them aren't good, we're still using some of them, we still cook food, and, you know, but in general, your myth has to integrate you into the social, cultural environment that you're in at the time that you're in it. So many of the ancient myths still work, but they must be updated to serve as an integrative system that works with where you're at now, or your myth becomes a potential virus that leads you to live out values that are incongruent with the social, cultural milieu that you're in, which means you run into lots of resistance that may make your life more challenging than enjoyable. Okay? Now, an example of a myth. And oftentimes a myth can be a cosmology. So a Chinese myth about the creation of the world, or of life, or the universe, says this: the dragon, as in the dragon, has a favorite hobby. The dragon's favorite hobby is to breathe universes into existence. Every breath creates a new universe. Within every breath are 2 dragons. One is female. Her name is Yin. The other is male. His name is Yang. They are identical twins, but slightly different than each other due to sexual orientation. Therefore, they love to play, but they can never get along because they always have a different perspective on things. No matter how hard one tries to trick the other, they forget that the other has just as much intelligence and just as much access to the truth. Therefore, the outsmarting never lasts too long, and it keeps the game going. And the punchline is the dragon says to his baby, or its baby dragons, not his, forgive me, to its baby dragons, the two of you can rest when you learn to get along. That's what Taoism's about. That's what Zen is about. The whole concept of Zen is learning to manage your dragons. We are so busy worrying about the problems of the world without realizing that what we see outside is a reflection of the unconscious of our inside. Lao Tzu says the government always reflects the people. So to the degree people walk around complaining about the government and how shitty things are, they don't realize that they're looking at their cultural myth, they're looking at their unconscious rising up, and when we have outdated myths that put us at odds with people that have other beliefs, we are still at grave danger of world wars. But now, as the kids get into technologies, we've got people with, shall we say, outdated myths, severely hampered growth and development into adulthood and responsibility, and dangerous toys to play with. So you can see people like Joseph Campbell and Carl Jung and many others. Steiner, for example, was very concerned that our mythologies are dangerous to survival, not only for us, but for the planet. So really understanding your myth is to... You can't ever truly understand life. That would be hubris or cocky. I understand life to the degree that I can share it with you and that I can live it. But I'm also in awe of the mystery, and at any moment ready to update my mythology, my metaphysics, my physics, my manual therapy, whatever it might be, to be more nourishing for my dream of achieving my potential as a human being. Okay, so first, evoke an individual sense of grateful affirmative awe for the monstrous mystery of existence. Second, to present an image of the cosmos that maintains your sense of awe and explain what you come into contact with in life. That's really, really important, okay? To maintain the image of awe, but explain what you're coming into contact with. For example, many people say to me, if God is love, then why all the dying babies, why all the war, etc., etc.? By asking the question, why would God allow this? They have already presented their myth to me. Meditate on that. They have already presented their myth to me, which is creating challenges because it's not maintaining a sense of mystery or awe. It's not giving them an understanding of what's happening in them and around them. It's leading to pain and confusion, which can turn into anger, resent, jealousy, and violence. Okay? Sound familiar? Look into the history of Christianity, or the history of Islam, or the history of Judaism. Turn on your television right now, and you will see myth clashes, all based on very old ideas. Okay? 3, to validate and maintain a sociological system. Remember our previous couple conversations in just a second? Here we go. To maintain a sociological system, a shared set of values. The values that you embody and express as your choices and actions produce or are the equivalent of the experience. Remember, the means always determine the end. If you're a crook and you steal from people, the means will determine the end. You will live the life of a crook. You will be treated as a crook. And to the degree that you yourself know you're a crook, you will have to deal with your inner conscious when it meets your unconscious and work through that. I'm not saying being a crook is right or wrong. I'm just saying your programming and your myth will determine your experience, especially on the day you take your last breath. Okay? And we'll get into that briefly. 4, to carry the individual through life stages of birth, childhood, adolescence, adulthood, middle age and old age, and death. Each one of these stages comes with significant changes in experience, in our level of knowledge, our level of wisdom, our level of our capacity to love self, to love other. In other words, as you go through this cycle, by the time you reach here, you should be going out of conditional love into empathetic and compassionate love, and you should be able to look back and literally see yourself in everybody else, see your journey, see the challenges that are common to all of us, see the archetypes that are common to all of us, see the mythologies and how they, either are harmonious or disharmonious. Look at the mythology, again, of the Dalai Lama, and then compare that to the mythology of, how about the Pope, or how about our president? Okay? That might scare you, sorry. Okay? So the myth, remember, the myth is also a system of maintaining a sociological system, and a sociological system is designed to be a place where it is perceptibly more safe to go through these stages of life. If you go through that out in the wild, it's a lot tougher. There's many, many more complications than when you're in a society where people can support each other. And remember, whenever you get a tribe and you grow a tribe into a society, you get further and further specialization of knowledge. When you're in a small tribe, you're spending so much time hunting, building shelters, protecting yourself. You don't have time to get into specialized knowledge. But once you get enough people, then you get people that can hunt well. You get people that can fish well. You get people that can cook well. You get people that are good with working leather. You get people that are good with animals, etc. Now you start getting specialized knowledge, which increases safety and security as a general rule of thumb, provided the specialized knowledge does not create stupidity. Today we have a weird situation because we have a world full of experts and we're the sickest and functionally the dumbest people we've ever been. So a sort of an analogy of what an expert is that I learned from Dr. Cliff Oliver that I like to use is an expert is someone who knows more and more about less and less until they know absolutely everything about nothing. Now, metaphysically that's good, but practically that's not so good. Okay? So now we can kind of conclude this, because where does it go? You see those lines? Those lines are a carryover from our last presentation on archetypes. And remember my circle, and I had those lines representing the personal unconscious, which is expressive of the collective unconscious, which means when you die, you get to come face to face with the part of you that you've denied or have not yet become aware of or experienced, which will include all the stuff you've stuffed to try to fit in if you stay in the social cultural box or take that path that way versus the path of the hero's journey. Most of the people on the hero's journey learn to deal with what's inside because it's part of the natural threshing society gives you, but you get sheltered in society. In other words, you may be a Christian and not really believe in it or enjoy it, but you do it for the shelter. But a person that lives that way also has to confront the reality of whether their actual belief and the way they've lived make meaning at the time of death. So we're now where we can see that the story that serves to integrate yourself with the self, the world, the cosmos, and the mystery ultimately is the story that either gives you a positive experience of integration and understanding and awe. Awe. Awe is not, oh my God, God's going to burn me in hell. That's not a healthy awe. That's awful. Okay? That's a myth that needs to be updated unless you just like to torture yourself. So if your myth is not providing the experience that is congruent with your stated dream or your ability to achieve your potential through your archetypes and your life experience, then your myth actually becomes dangerous and can be the seat of much body-mind pathology. And trust Paul Chek, after 31 years of coaching people, I've seen and worked with people that have a lot of very, very scary, confusing, chaotic, outdated, damaging, dangerous myths that produce all sorts of diseases. Thank you, everyone, for having so many of those, because it helps me maintain a great living, and I love helping people build new myths, so it works out beautifully. It couldn't be any better for me. Remember, all cops need robbers, all doctors need sick people, and coaches need people with screwed up myths. Or shall we say, less than ideal. Okay? So here we see something very interesting. Your myth largely is the explanation of the experience you're having. Do you understand transitional states? Do you understand that life leads to death? Do you understand what it means to kill and what it means to create and what it means to nourish and what it means to plant and to grow and to seed and to fruit and all these other things? Do you understand the life cycle? Do you understand relationships and interrelationships? Do you understand what the function of your life is, what your culture is all about? These are all essential things. So ultimately, if you're living out of your heart and your head's integrated and your myth and your archetypes support each other, at the moment of death, all the experiences you have here leave with you. And what you have is an integrated experience with an integrated myth. And in the afterlife, you have, shall we say, the unknown facing you. I can certainly share what I think happens, but that's not the function of a myth. That would be sharing my myth. What I can tell you, though, is that many of us have a lot of fear about death and a lot of confusing myths that are based on something that doesn't really, shall we say, demonstrate a lot of depth of thought. So I'm going to point out one closing comment to you. Here you see unconditional love, which manifests potential as wholeness, in which we get individuality and wholeness. Within this sphere is existence. The sphere of existence is all based on those two dragons I talked about. The life cycle we will call the positive cycle of a wave function. The death cycle we'll call the negative cycle of a wave function. Why a lot of people are afraid of death is because they don't understand that life itself is a container of death, and death is a container of life, and they actually create each other. Life and death are not oppositional. Life and death are not functional opposites. On, awake, dead, gone. They are states of consciousness expressing itself, and they are natural cycles, just like winter, spring, summer, fall, day and night. You could say that the day dies and becomes the night, and that would be one way to look at it. But you wouldn't say that day excludes night or night excludes day, because all you got to do is just get on an airplane and start flying, and you'll see that day and night become each other. And the circle of wholeness that represents the mystery, which you cannot know, because to know anything, remember, you have to have an is-isn't relationship. God is, God isn't. Love is, love isn't. If it is hot, it isn't cold. If it is cold, it isn't hot. So there's always an is-isn't relationship here. So knowledge becomes very, very deceiving, because any belief can only exist because a counter-belief exists at the same time. So once we reach this point called death, we kind of have an opportunity, a window to evaluate whether or not our program beliefs match the experience that we're having in and as consciousness. But remember, life and death are all contained within the circle of the mystery, and one creates the other. So I share that with you because if you look at tribal cultures that, shall we say, produced healthy, wise people that have been around, and some of them are still around, like the Tibetan culture, for example. When you look at their mythology, you see something radically different than what we practice at large in the West in general. And it concerns me now that India and many other third world countries, China, are now taking on our behaviors and our mythologies and our ideologies. So you might want to meditate what happens about what happens when the rest of the world produces as much garbage as we do. And I mean that in every way. Okay? So it's been fun sharing about the myths. I hope you take some time to look into Joseph Campbell's works. There's a great series called Mythos, which is quite comprehensive. There's The Power of Myth, which I'd suggest for beginners as a DVD series or a book, where Joseph Campbell's interviewed by Bill Moyers. There's the works of Carl Jung and many others. We've given the references to where you can find more. In my next presentation, I will talk about the integration of body-mind, and then I'll finish with my definition of spiritual evolution. So thanks for joining me today. Look forward to sharing more soon.